going to open with some prayer. God, you are the one who made us, who loves us, is always calling us closer to you. Give you thanks for convening us, and we pray that this time will be fruitful and may deepen our knowledge of you through our love for one another, for all that you have made and all that you have loved. Amen.
Come on in.
So we've had a wonderful series so far on Luke. I've learned so much from watching the YouTube videos, which if you haven't availed yourself of those, it would be a good thing to do. Each lecture, I think, stands independently, but they also tie together quite well. Evan Bassett is our holding the sort of the keystone for the series. He's teaching every other week, and then so Benno and I are sharing the other teaching groups. But perhaps we should do names. I have to confess that it takes me a long time to remember people's names, and I might not be the only one who's like that. So I'm Shirley, and I've been around Epiphany since around 2008, I think. I'm happy to be here.
I'm Jeff, and I've been around here I don't know how long. My wife is more well known than I am, but she isn't here right now. Her name is Wallace. Anyway, she's involved in flowers, and I do things. I help out with some of the meals and things like that. So.
I'm Esther. I've been kind of in and out for a long time, since about 2008. So, Esther.
I'm Christine. I've been here for about 10 years. And I just want to say we had the most people in standing community this morning that I've ever had. It was very exciting.
And you're a Eucharistic minister, so yeah, right.
Yeah. So, yes. We nearly ran out of hosts. It was very exciting. It just never happened.
Did you get asked to bless anybody?
People sort of. I had the chalice. People sort of rolled by me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I blessed a Barbie.
This morning?
Oh.
Young woman had her Barbie at the rail, and I said communion, and the mom said not for Barbie.
You've seen Episcopal priest Barbie, have you?
No.
Oh, she is incredible. Her vestments.
Are you kidding?
No, they're real. True fact. There is Episcopal priest Barbie.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm David Brennan, and I've also been here since 2008, which clearly was a key vintage.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm Benno, and I've been here since 2006. So yeah.
Okay. So today's theme is how we can know God further through what Luke has to tell us about ethics. And perhaps I should start by saying what I mean by ethics. What I don't mean is a list of things to do and not do. I don't even necessarily mean a list of principles of what helps us discern the good and the right and the beautiful. But I do mean how we treat each other, which is, to me, a more nuanced, open-ended way of thinking about ethics, and really gets to the point that it is about human relationships, and I want to expand our understanding of who counts as us to include everything that God has made, everything that God loves. That it's time for us not to think of everything other than humans as less than human. It's a big mistake, and we need to cut it out. And we need to have more of a sibling relationship with the world around us, or even understand that that's a parental relationship, that the created world gives birth to us. I mean, to honor that relationship as well. So to me, the whole, all that is included in the scope of ethics, and we have a moral responsibility to how we treat each other, like how we treat trees and how we treat dirt and how we treat rocks. So that's kind of a bit of where I'm coming from, and I've been wondering about John the Baptist's question that people posed to John the Baptist early in Luke's Gospel around what should we do. And he's just gotten through calling them a brood of vipers and so on, and people are like, well, okay, given that that's the case, and we are in fact a brood of vipers, what should we do? So that was kind of my starting point for thinking about this. I was also thinking about Evan's wonderful opening lecture where he used the Magnificat, Mary's song, about as a template for us as readers of Luke's narrative to tell about what we should be looking for, how we can see who Jesus is, how we can see what is God trying to tell us about God's self through Jesus, through the incarnated body and actions and life of Jesus. So if it is true, since it is true that God lifts up the lowly, that God fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich away empty, that God casts down the mighty from their thrones. Since those things are true of God, they ought to be true of Jesus, and that will help us to understand who Jesus is and help us to understand more fully who God is. So with that in mind, we've got a couple of Bibles here, and I wonder if somebody would read for me Luke chapter 3. We get into John's sermon. Just verses. So, just 10 through 12. Or 10 through 14. So Luke 3, 10 through 14.
And the crowds asked him, "What then should we do?" In reply, he said to them, "Whoever has 2 coats must share with anyone who has none, and whoever has food must do likewise." Even tax collectors came to be baptized, and they asked him, "Teacher, what should we do?" He said to them, "Collect no more than the amount prescribed for you." Soldiers also asked him, "And we, what should we do?" He said to them, "Do not extort money from anyone by threats or false accusation, and be satisfied with your wages."
That doesn't really strike me as outrageous advice. I mean, there is a challenge in there for certain, but there's the images, the sort of received reading that we get of John the Baptist is that he's a wild man, that he's wild-eyed and got, kind of crazy and maybe a little psycho, and I just don't see the scriptural support for that. He was probably or possibly an Essene, which was one way of interpreting the religious world in that moment, was that there were 4 groups that were 4 sort of identity groups that were among the Jewish people and as they expressed their lives. One of them being the Essenes, who were separatists who lived in the desert, had a life of prayer and renunciation. They were ascetics, meaning that for them this world was very important. And the irony of the Essenes and the ascetics is that the concrete world is so important to them, and they take it very seriously. They're very careful in their ethics and morality, their daily rule of life, and tend not to seek if you contrast them with the more mystical side, which is kind of a false distinction, but we'll take that as a rough start. If we contrast them with the mystical side, which can be very visionary and kind of otherworldly. The Essenes and the ascetic side of the house is very concentrated on how do I live with my possessions? What are the most concrete interactions with the world around me, both human and other tangible elements of the world that will teach me who God is and teach me to love. So John seems to have been part of the Essene community. The people who are coming out to hear him are people that he knows. This is not a big place in the world. It's not like people are flying in. They're just kind of walking out to the countryside. Yes, he does live away from the town, but it's not so far removed that he's, the wilderness is very close at hand in this world, in the world of Palestine at that time. So you don't have to go days and days journey to get to Jordan. You could go outside of the town, and there's a holy man living out in the woods, or out in the caves, out in the desert. And that was not something, again, that was totally unheard of. It was a rare calling, but people had that calling. Some of the other groups who were sort of on the scene would have been the Pharisees, who in some ways are more similar to our way of life than any of the other groups, in that the Pharisees were Jews who tended to be well educated. They wanted to preserve Jewish identity, and their way of doing so was to go along to get along. So now the big difference between them and us is that they are living as an occupied people. So we are, in this case, we are the occupiers in our social world. So with that big caveat, but still the similarity is that they are trying to work within the political and social world where they find themselves, and then for them it's a matter of survival of their entire nation to be able to do things Caesar's way. So they also have a lot of contact with, through their commercial and business world and their general political world, they have more contact with Greek thought. So they are entertaining the question of what happens after death in a way that the more conservative schools of Judaism were rejecting. So specifically the question about resurrection was one that was kind of a hip topic among the youngsters. And the Pharisees took the question seriously and wanted to interact with it, as opposed to the Sadducees, who did not accept the idea of resurrection of the dead because it was not something that is traditionally found in Judaism, although there are some places where people come back to life in the Hebrew Testaments. But in general, it's not a feature. And the question of what happens to dead bodies is not really something that the Judaism of that time would have dealt with very closely. They're very focused on knowing and worshiping God in this world and understanding, studying, loving the law, preserving ritual, keeping ritual intact, keeping the community intact that way. So the Sadducees, and you can kind of remember which one is which, because the Sadducees didn't believe in an afterlife, and they were sad, you see. So anyway,
Did you make that up?
I did not. It was told to me, but it was kind of helpful, actually, I have to admit. The Sadducees were more like a people within a people, in that they really wanted to minimize how much they took on the ways of their Roman occupiers. So they would have maintained, stricter dietary laws, and there's all kinds of conversation about who eats with whom. And the issue there is that if you simply accept an invitation to go to a ritually impure house for dinner, then you're going to be served food that is offered to idols, which is a very big deal. To consume something that has been given to an idol means to take that into yourself and to be participating in the act of worship that is the common meal. So that was something that it's kind of like back in the day when the golf course was like the real business meeting place, and certain people got invited, certain men got invited to the golf course and nobody else did. And yes, you could get hired possibly for certain positions, but if you weren't on the golf course, you were not going to be making business deals. So the Sadducees were like, they were not going to the golf course. They were not putting themselves in, they were not willing to make the compromises to get in the club where the real political power was wielded. And for them, that was their way of preserving the identity of the people of God. And then finally we have the Zealots. The Zealots were more in favor of armed overthrow of their occupiers. We can certainly see elements in Jesus' life of the prayer life of the Essenes and the very lively interaction about that encounter between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. We can really see Jesus participating in that discussion. I don't see a whole lot of evidence around zealotry for him, although he does, in all of the Gospels, as the story progresses, Jesus gets more and more inflammatory, and he's up in the ante. It's not just that people are provoking him. I think he's provoking, as the narrative drama builds, that's driven by Jesus becoming more and more emphatic about, in his critique of both the Jewish world around him and the Gentile world around him, which culminates in the crucifixion, which is kind of a big thing. The crucifixion and resurrection are something that all the Gospels have got to try to explain, because the crucifixion was an enormous failure of the story. If you think about how heartbreaking it would be to have this Messiah be killed for political reasons in the most shameful and degrading way. It's just so humiliating, bewildering, and traumatizing. And then to have this highly improbable story of resurrection coming right on the heels of that, we've got some studying to do. So we're going to see the drama build in that direction. But overall, I don't really see Jesus as a zealot. When we get to the latter chapters of Luke and Matthew, where he's uttering destruction, maybe. But I still don't think he's actually calling.
Tear it all down.
Yeah, he is. But I don't really hear him actually calling people to arms around that. So anyway, back to John the Baptist. Putting him in that context, that they are going out to see somebody that sort of a kinsman of Jesus, somebody that some of these folks are related to. And yes, he starts with a really harsh sermon for them, but when they kind of accept his indictment and accept baptism from him, their question is, well, what do we do? And he says, if you have 2 coats, give away 1. That's, it's not saying you have to give away everything. Just give away 1 of your coats if you have to. If you have food, then you need to share your food. tax collectors. They asked him to collect, and he says, collect no more than the amount prescribed for you. Tax collectors were Jews of low social standing who were employed by the Roman Empire. And, I'm going to tell Esther, you have to go collect $100 from every house, and that's your job. And then when you go to every house, you might want to collect $120 because you need to feed your family, and you are collecting it from people who have more than you, but they're of your own community. So it's a way to tear apart the social fabric of the Jewish community, and to further humiliate some of the people who were already kind of the scoundrels in the group. And similarly with soldiers, some of those may have been Jews, some of them not, but extortion and accusations and being satisfied with your wages. Again, being a soldier is typically not a well-paid life. These are people who were kind of fodder for empire, and he's not telling them not to rebel, but he is telling them to sharpen their regard for who do they really owe something to. Is it to the empire, or is it to the individuals, the families, the communities that are really not an abstract empire, but they're concrete community that could be a community of love. So that's kind of John the Baptist's ethics, is about kind of fairness, community, mercy, some sacrifice in the sense that if you're not extorting, then you do have less for yourself and your family. But I don't hear him as a wild man. So if we flip over to chapter 6, let's take a look there. I think this is actually the reading, the gospel for today. It's in the series that we're in right now. 6, 27 through 38, a little bit longer selection. Can somebody read that for us?
26 through what?
I want 27, chapter 6,
Yeah.
27 through 38.
But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good for those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Whoever hits you on the cheek, offer him the other also, and whoever takes away your coat, do not withhold your shirt from him either. Give to everyone who asks you, and whoever takes away what is yours, do not demand it back. The same way that you want them to treat you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners who love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those who you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to the sinners in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. And He Himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. 38. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Pardon, and you will be pardoned. Give, and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shake it together, and running over, by your standards of measure. It will be measured to you in return.
What are you hearing there?
That's way more radical. Go out of your way to be good to people, even if they treat you bad.
I have to say, this is amazingly personal to me. It's amazing that something from 2000, Sharon said this in the sermon for me, 2,000 years ago could like hit me this much, because I'm dealing with someone at work who I am not merciful, or I feel is very wicked. And so it's been like, okay, people have been dealing with this for a long time.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it any easier.
It doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
At least you have some solidarity.
At least there's solidarity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But I'm also struck with sort of teleological implications of Jesus' teaching versus John's, and by that I mean Jesus is talking about suggesting a finality to things, and maybe it's a foreshadowing of crucifixion or whatever, where John is saying, okay, give him a coat if you have another coat, and everybody gets one. What Jesus is saying is, give him everything. And by the way, you're going to die when you do that. You're going to have exposure. If you ask for your coat, give him your shirt too, and watch out. That's part of the radical quality to it, is that it really presses against our common sense, against our getting along, because I'm going to be cold.
Now you're the one in need.
Yeah. So there's a voluntary impoverishment that's present in Jesus' ethics that's not in John's, which is striking.
What's been helpful to me in understanding this is thinking about Martin Luther King and talking about how he behaved. He taught people to behave when they were being attacked by law or whoever, and that love will overcome hate, not hating back, and that's how I connect with this.
Yeah, and so there's life in that regard for a large group. Maybe the individual, it's perilous for an individual, but maybe it's life-giving to a community. The community behaves this way, as King's community did. Change happens. Individual behaves this way, you're imperiled. And not to say that those two things don't go together in some way. Hauerwas talks about pacifism as a communal act, not as an individual act.
Right.
And that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, the advice about, it's not advice, the imperative to pray for those who abuse you, which is abuse is the word that the New Revised Common Standard Version uses. If anyone, and I think your translation is
Said hate.
and then it said something about if anyone hits you on the cheek. Because I've always heard the word strike, and that's a little more refined.
This is a little bit different version.
Yeah, it's a little,
Did you make one? Yeah, it said like, do not. Mine says, do not ask for them again in your city. It felt really
a lot more visceral.
Yeah.
But I worry about, like, what does this say to the abused? That's difficult and troubling.
There's, I can't remember who shared it, but a story. Was it your story about the abused woman who saw the crucified Christ?
Oh, yeah. From Serene Jones.
It's a powerful story.
Yeah. This is a story of Serene Jones is a theologian. She's also the president of Union Theological Seminary in New York, which is a very fine seminary. But she has a fairly recent book that is her Christology. And she said that she had struggled for 10 years to write a Christology, or more specifically, a theology of the cross, to sort of say why crucifixion, really the same question that the Gospels are trying to answer, and that Paul wrestles with over and over again. Why crucifixion? What could this possibly mean? And she ended up not writing a systematic theology, because her turning point in her 10-year process of writing this book was that the cross is not a systematic theological event, that it is the shattering of our systems, and that as she was coming to this, she was also, as in her pastoral work, spending time with women who had been abused, who were subject to intimate partner violence, and specifically participating in a self-defense class along with the women. And they met in the basement of the church. It so happened that one of the class meetings was on I think it was Maundy Thursday, and she went up to attend the service, and they were telling the story of the cross, and some of the women from the class went with her, and she was like, "Oh God, we're going to traumatize these women all over again by glorifying the cross," and she was like worried about this, but here these women come to church with her, and there were 3 or 4 of them that attended, and on the way out, these women who had themselves had their bodies violated, exposed, broken, each of them responded from their own grief and anguish and anger, but also it's like, oh, somebody sees my who I am, like that is me, that is, here is not the worship of the evil in it, but the valuing of the human person and honoring the fact of what she has been through.
That's kind of what you're saying in your workplace, kind of going, oh, this has happened generationally and for thousands of years, and there's
Right.
The cross is an act of solidarity.
Yeah, that it's not merely a private anguish.
Nor is it a voyeuristic, something about evil and the grotesquerie of violence.
Right.
There's a ton of that voyeuristic stuff in our culture, the grotesquerie of violence.
Right.
So it's not that either.
Right.
Which it can be, and I think Mel Gibson's film sort of turned it into that.
Exactly, and that's exactly what the canonical Gospels do not do. They do not, they are not like graphic. Yes, they do talk about blood and piercing, but they don't talk about like whose guts end up where. We don't that's not what the story is. The story stays on the each of the storytellers invites us to stick with the one being crucified, but not out of grotesque, fascination, but out of a sense that we're there, that we're there in the same way Peter is there as a very conflicted person, or we're there as Mary is there, somebody who's got this being who is of her body that she's.
It's about ubiquity, not particularity.
Yeah. And not
commonplace of the cross, rather than the exceptionalism of it.
Yeah, and being witness to it in the sense of staying with it, not turning away from it, but not fetishizing it.
Mm-hmm. It'd be like, perhaps, in the Black community, if you were to say, if the story was about a Black man being arrested and tried and imprisoned, everybody in the Black community go, we get that.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of this sensationalization of, oh
Right.
my God, a black man's been arrested. You know, everybody would go,
Right, right.
you know, this isn't a big deal. But, you know, in the sense
right.
that
It's a big deal
unique,
because
right.
it's, you know, yeah,
It's a big deal because it happens to all of us.
because it's part of our entire family
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
You know, it's not mine, if it's
Yeah.
not my personal, I haven't been the one arrested, then
Right.
I know people who
Yeah.
are very dear to me who have, you know, and yeah, so there's that. And I think, like, what does that tell us about getting back to the question of ethics, like, is this helping us to get a better sense of how we ought to live, how we ought to treat one another? This mandate to pray for our enemies. I think it's probably significant that in the Sermon on the Plain, when Jesus is, before he tells us about actions, about, you know, turning the other cheek, he tells us to start with prayer. And so acknowledging the reality of God is, and kind of collecting, that's where we begin with it. We kind of think of prayer as kind of putting some intentionality into, insofar as we can, see the world the way God sees the world, love the world the way God loves the world, and which of course, you know, I'm certainly not up to. But there's that, but I'm invited into that process just the same.
The hardest parts for me about this are, give to everyone who begs from you, but anyone who takes away your goods, do not ask from them again. These are, you know, first of all, we have a lot of conversation, I think, in Christians about, do you give to people that you think might go spend it on alcohol and some more drugs? And the other part is, gosh, if somebody's taken something from me, I am going to ask for it back. You know? And so how does that relate to
It's very challenging, isn't it?
yeah.
Well, it doesn't, it's not good advice for a well-run world.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
It just isn't.
And, you know, it's the other part that resonates with me, you know, John's, you know, about taxes and money and wages and all that in Luke 20, you know, where they show a point and say, you know,
Whose is it?
Whose
Right.
is it? You know, do we pay tribute to Caesar? And Jesus is very flippant with them in some regard.
Right.
You know, he goes, well, whose face is on it? Caesar. He goes, Caesar. Like the shrug of the shoulder, like, I don't care what you do. You know, and give to God what's God's. And so it's this sort of radical reorientation of life that's utterly impractical.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's like about face, and you know, you go, huh? How do you raise a family? How do you own a house? How do you,
Right.
you know, pay
Which
your
is,
bills?
you know, I always hesitate when people say, oh, Jesus was a socialist. And I'm like, well, he really didn't espouse a political or governing system.
Or an economic one.
No, that's not.
Yeah.
He moved within those systems and
Yeah.
held them accountable, and yet he didn't like say, here's the best way to run the world.
But that is interesting because, you know, the iteration that the apostles take it to in Luke is Christian socialism.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, there's those early stories in Acts where they all get together and go, okay, bring all you got,
Right,
and we're going
right.
to sell it, and then we're going to redistribute it, and that's kind of like, whoa.
Yeah, they held
So
all
here's
things in
a
common.
radical reorientation.
Yeah, but that was, I'm going to say that was based not on them having a political, you know, awakening or taking,
Right.
you know, but on the experience of being knit together through, you know, having to come to terms with the life, with their encounter with Jesus and what they knew about Jesus, even if they hadn't personally.
Well, and John too. I mean, it's almost like a melding of John and Jesus in
Yeah.
that sense. It's like, okay, John's given us this practical, and Jesus has given us this impossible.
Right,
How do we even move in that direction?
right,
You know, so maybe there's something about You know, maybe there is something about death and sort of end things in the sense that if you're gonna bring all you got and sell it and then redistribute it, you're gonna die to your sense of possession.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of got to give that up. And I think that's one of the rubs in our capitalistic culture is that, you know, we've worked hard for our stuff. You know, and it's like, I'm looking at, you know, the next 15 years and how I'm going to retire. And people think, God, I got a house, you know, in Cameron Park, because it's going to get better. I hope the market continues to go that direction, because that's going to help me out, you know. Anyway, I mean,
yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm you know, I'm at a similar point in life, and I'm like, I'm screwed. You know? And I need a plan too, and I need somebody, you know, I need somebody to invest in my well-being, and you know, I do. I need that.
I read this amazing book on Django Reinhardt years ago, and all I can remember about it is that he had, like, part of the Romani culture had no sense of ownership. I literally cannot remember anything from this book, but like if a car had run out of gas, he would just leave it. He was like, oh well, that car's done.
Yeah.
And like, I blew my mind. It's still like, but really it totally
and what
makes sense
culture
to
was
me.
this?
The Gypsy Romani.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it was just like, it was just so, everything was just so temporary. And it was just like, if you, if the car ran out of gas or broke down, you would just be like, all right, that's good, I'll get it, I'll move on, I'll get something else, and I'll walk. And it was just so, like, I can't remember anything about his music. Now he died.
Yeah.
But it was like that part, it's just so radical. And just
and that's the thing that kind of like was still kind of rolling around in your mind.
Yeah, like how do you,
so
like how, because you have nothing, and you just sort of get
you
stuff.
have everything.
Well, and Hildegard is sort of a step to the side of that, in the sense of a communitarianism where you don't need to own, like if you have a car, that's good for all of us, because that means we don't need to have one. We'll just borrow yours.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a sense of ethics that says, this is, or at least in Hildegard's iteration of it, you know, that's kind of, that's a little bit more existential to leave the car on the side of the road than it is to borrow it from your neighbor who owns it. But still, there's a sense of reorientation.
Yeah. Radical.
You know,
About stuff, right? And then you also like where you leave the stuff is going to impact what it's like when you come back around. So that brings like the rest of the world back into it.
And what does a day hold? You know, I mean, what's the purpose of a day? You know, is it to, you know, because if you're going to walk in your car without a gas, it's going to change the context.
Right.
And you know, it's been really liberating the past several years for me to just like, when I run out of stuff and resources, because I've had a struggle around like, you know, finishing graduate school and getting employment, and it's all very complicated. And I'm just really kind of like, well, whatever. I don't need what I thought I needed. You know, what I needed then I don't need anymore. You know, and there are other things that I'm clearer about and feel more urgency about. There were 2 stories about the stuff and whether you ask for stuff back and whether you give. So in my 20s, I lived at Myrtle and Fifth in Midtown, and would walk to All Saints, a couple blocks away. And before they put up a fence to keep poor people out, or to control, keep poor people from asking for money during coffee hour, which broke my heart. It made me so angry. But before that, there were a bunch of old men sitting on the side steps, and one of them asked for money, and I just didn't know what to say, which I think is kind of an appropriate response in a way. And the guy said, I'm old enough to be your father, and that kind of woke me up, because he was right. And I thought, I'm not going to withhold, you know, here. I don't actually need this when you look at it in that way. So that was one of those little moments that broke through. And then that kind of led me to think, well, you know, when I get my paycheck, or when I pay for a service or goods that support somebody else in formal employment, I would tell, you know, the people around me who have formal employment, and nobody tells me how to spend my money. If I want to spend it on drugs or alcohol, and God knows there are plenty of addicted people who have really good jobs, and in a sense, I'm paying their bills.
It's a privilege for a rich person
to get at that kind of distance, because they're billing for it rather than asking with their hand out like this. So that kind of changed my mind. And then the other about asking back is the story of the bicycle. My bike was stolen, my lackadaisical attitude toward things. I left my bike
on the side of the road.
I did. I left it on the carport for one night, and it was gone. Yeah. And I was like really sad because I liked that bike, but I was also like, well, that's what I get, and I guess somebody really wanted a bike, and that was probably in 2012, and I think it was like last summer. I pulled up at Fellini's in Candler Park on a Sunday night, and there was my bike in the bike rack. And I was like, kind of the stare of recognition, like, yeah, that's my bike. That's where I chipped it when I fell that time, and that's where I replaced the gear, whatever. And I ended up writing a note and sticking it on the handlebar and saying, I have no idea how this bike came into your life. It's been several years, but this is totally my bike. And if you want to talk about that, here's my phone number. And then I went in and had a slice of pizza, and there's this guy comes out, and he looks, and he's like looking around, reading this note. And so I went out and talked to him, and we talked about it, and he's like, yeah, this is your bike. And I had too much crap in my car to take him and the bike back to his house. So I just said, well, and he also didn't feel he could give it to me on the spot because he had just...
Had he stolen it?
No. It had come with the house. He was like living with a bunch of other young men in a house where people move in and out, and it was just like part of the house. But he had just moved in, so he didn't feel that he could just give away something that was part of the house. So I said, well, okay, go talk to your housemates and just give me a call when you're ready. And he did. And I got my bike back. And when I put something about this on Facebook, there was a long thread of people who were outraged that I didn't call the police.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I don't need the police to mediate every interaction.
It's restorative justice. And,
and if he had said,
So how did it feel that in light of asking for something back? I mean, how does that, it's a beautiful story.
It is.
I have an almost identical story about my daughter's bike being stolen on our carport. And I immediately jumped in the car and drove around the neighborhood trying to look for it. And we found it. And it was some young men out in their yard, just playing basketball or something, and there was the bike. And I got out of the car and said, I think that's my daughter's, and they're like, oh, we just found it. I said, oh. And I said, get on the bike, and she read it out. We just took it, but didn't do anything else, didn't talk to the parents or anything like that. And, I felt okay about that.
Yeah. And I thought, if this guy had said, well, whatever, I'm taking off with the bike, I would have been like, okay.
So is there a necessary, if you're going to let it go, if you're not going to take it back, so it's still, because I'm totally with you in that, but.
I didn't actually ask for it back, I just said, if you want to talk about this situation.
Well, that's what I was saying, there's a naming of things, like, you've stolen something, and then does that open the door for repentance and
And it is, some truth-telling and accountability.
Yeah. And you did the same in a way.
It's my daughter. A little further than you did, but
still. Or dangerously, perhaps.
It's not like a confrontation too. It's probably disarming for each of the people. You're not expecting to be respected, or you're sort of expecting the police, and then it sort of becomes this confrontation.
And
on the civilized conversation.
So here's an opposite story. Can I tell them opposite?
Well, let me finish off this one because it has a little punchline to it. So I didn't want to go over to this guy's house, by myself. I don't know these people, so I do have some prudence. So my housemate at the time came with me. And, she was just going to be like this other person was coming with me. So we walk in, and they had just moved into a new house, so they had very little furniture, and like one of the few pieces of furniture they had was a couch. And it was the exact same kind of couch, same color, same build, same upholstery as our house. And so Diane says, "That's my couch." I'm so confused, like, are they taking
And my dog, and my journal. That's a great punchline. What? Oh, that's funny. So mine's a weird, different kind of version of the story. So this homeless guy comes to the front door, and he'd been by once before, and so this is like second time in 10 days. Youngish guy, and it was super cold out, and so he's cold, and he's like, you got anything for me, whatever. And I'm like, you know what, my dead dad, who I revere and have iconic things of his. I had an old ski coat of his that I rarely ever wore because it was old and trashy and stuff, but it was my dad's, and it was, there was a sentimental value to it. And I thought, I gotta give this to this guy, because it's a big, huge, warm coat. And I don't wear it. It's silly for me to keep it, and it would honor my dad to give it to this person. So I do it again. The guy's like, "Oh, great," and walks off. Comes back 3 or 4 days later. The weather's warm and stuff, and he doesn't have the coat. I'm like, "Where's the coat?" And he goes, "It was too much. I got rid of it." And I was like, "Son of a..." And I was so angry. I didn't want the coat. I didn't want it back until then. And then I was like, "Oh, you rat," and
quite let go of it.
Yeah, and I was just so, and then I was just like, "Oh, I'm an idiot," and you give something away. And
well, and then there's also the call
and,
to empathize with what that person's life is like.
Yeah,
if you don't have a house, then you don't have a closet. And it makes more sense.
You live existentially. It gets warm. You take off the coat. You walk away.
And maybe somebody else
leave it in the car.
Right. So we have to close, but I want to close this up.
Oh yeah, I gotta go too. So.
Okay.
That's where I'm gonna get the little one.
Yeah.
I gotta go to church. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. So for those who remain, I wanted to close just by this question of ethics and how we treat one another and how we learn who God is in the process and what Luke is trying to point us toward. And this is, you've probably heard this before, it's from Albert Schweitzer, the end of his book on the quest of the historical Jesus. It's not a life of Jesus, it's a review of the scholarship about, in the 19th and 20th century, there was this big scholarly obsession, really, with figuring out who Jesus was based on, new scientific findings and imperialism. As empire expanded, it opened up more access to texts and so on. So through all of this, he's reviewing the attempts to write a life of Jesus. What Schweitzer concludes is, we can find no designation which expresses what he is for us. He comes to us as one unknown, without a name, as of old by the lakeside. He came to those men who knew him not. He speaks to us the same word, "Follow thou me," and sets us to the task which he has to fulfill for our time. He commands, and to those who obey him, whether they be wise or simple, he will reveal himself in the toils, the conflicts, the sufferings which they shall pass through in his fellowship, and as an ineffable mystery, they shall learn in their own experience who he is.